us, like why do Muslims do this? Why do we do that, right? Or why don't we do this? The short answer, why do Muslims fast, is because God told us to, or at least we believe God tells us to fast. The Quran is the holy text of Islam. So Muslims believe that the sacred book, the Quran, which was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is the literal speech of God to humanity, right? Revealed, of course, in the Arabic language, 1400 years ago or so. In that text, Muslims believe that God speaks to us directly and tells us in the second chapter of the Quran that we should fast. And I've given you the citation here if you're curious. But basically in the Quran chapter 2, it tells us, "O you who have believed, decreed upon you is fasting. Specifically decreed upon you fast during the month of Ramadan." And as you can see in that second verse up there, so whoever sights the new moon of the month of Ramadan, let them fast it. So importantly for Muslims, and I'm going to get into more details on this in a moment, Ramadan is one of the months on the Islamic calendar, right? And Muslims, for sacred purposes and for religious events, in terms of keeping track of sacred time, Muslims use a lunar calendar, right? And actually, just like other faith communities, just like our Jewish family, just like Hindus as well, I believe, use a lunar calendar. So Muslims, during the month of Ramadan, which is one of the 12 months on the lunar calendar in Islam, believe that they should fast during that month. And again, we'll talk more specifically as we go what that looks like. And in fact, like I said, Muslims fundamentally fast because Muslims believe God tells them to, right? But in this instance, in this verse, one of the fascinating things I think is interesting about this verse is that it gives us a reason. It actually tells us. Muslims believe God says, fast during the month of Ramadan so that it might make you more righteous, right, or pious. And one Muslim scholar I admire and I listen to quite a bit has interpreted that phrase to say, fast so that you might improve your relationship with God, right? Because piety, righteousness they're kind of unfamiliar words with us these days. So fast during the month of Ramadan so that it will improve your relationship with God, make you a better person somehow. All right, so that's fundamentally why Muslims fast, although, right, there are other reasons that Muslims might fast, there's not reasons, but other benefits to fasting. So Muslims are fasting as an act of worship, but one of the things I've seen over the past many years is as we lead up to the month of Ramadan, I guarantee you're probably going to see an article in the newspaper or somewhere about the benefits of intermittent fasting. Because there always seems to be coincidentally talk about intermittent fasting as we approach the month of Ramadan. So there may be other benefits, health benefits for people as well Muslims when they fast. This year, and like I said, Ramadan is a month on the lunar calendar, right? And as many of us know, the lunar calendar is shorter than the solar calendar, the Gregorian calendar that we use. So that means the month of Ramadan comes 11 days earlier every year. So this year, which is, I believe on the Islamic calendar, we're in year 1444. And so this year, Muslims who were fasting will be fasting from the 23rd of March to the 20th of April. And these are the predicted dates. Many, many Muslims will actually wait until they can see that new moon before they start fasting. But these are the predicted dates, which are usually pretty good. So most Muslims you'll find this year will be starting to fast on the 23rd of March. Muslims fast during that month. It's not a fast all month. It's a fast during the daylight hours of the month of Ramadan. So Muslims will fast from dawn until sunset for the 30 or 29 days this year of Ramadan. And you can see, right, we're approaching, right, we're coming from the winter to the summer solstice, so that the days are actually getting a little bit longer through the month of Ramadan. You can see dawn, 5:49, on the first of Ramadan coming up shortly, 7:30 sunset, and then by the end of the month, we've added what? About an hour and a half or so of daylight, of fasting time, which is always very interesting. It's really interesting how it affects impacts the practice. And actually, 11 days earlier every year, right? So these are just a date in the past. A few years ago, Muslims were fasting on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, which these are the times in Minneapolis, sunrise, sunset. I said that wrong again. Dawn until sunset. It's not sunrise, by the way, it's dawn, which is well before sunrise. So you can see the longest day of the year, summer solstice, when we were fasting just a few years ago, 3:31 until just a little bit after 9 o'clock. Long days in Minnesota, right? And this is Minneapolis. It would be a few minutes longer for y'all up here. This year, you know, the longest day, not too bad, 4:51 to 8:06. In a few years, Muslims will be fasting during the month of Ramadan right around Christmas time, you know, the shortest day of the year. And then I think the shortest day of the year is something like almost 7 o'clock until about 4:30, right? So very short. So the interesting thing, again, from the point of view of a practicing Muslim, the fascinating thing is that no two Ramadans are ever quite the same, right? Every year it's a little bit different just because those times are always just a little bit off and just changing a couple minutes even every day as we go through the month. Every year brings its new challenges and its new benefits and rewards for Muslims who are practicing. And as Muslims are fasting, in Islam, when we talk about fasting, it is a total fast. So Muslims believe from dawn until sunset, they should abstain from all food and all drink. So, and as this is my friend Mamdouh in this photograph here, and he bought this t-shirt a few years ago. Remember when we were fasting across the summer solstice? The most common question we get, no, not even water, right? So yeah, nothing all day long from dawn until sunset. We don't get that question as much now that the days are getting shorter during Ramadan, but yeah, when it was those long days, people would, not even water? Nope, not even water. Muslims also fast from intimacy, right, with their spouses during the daylight hours as well. So at sunset, that's when Muslims break their fast, right? So we'll talk more about kind of how Muslims break their fast. But yeah, at sunset, Muslims eat and drink normally, right? All the things they're normally allowed to eat or drink. And then just wake up early the next morning and repeat that process for, you know, the 28 or 29 days or so of the lunar month of Ramadan. It is an obligation, Muslims believe, for all healthy adult Muslims to fast. And adulthood, by the way, generally speaking, in the Muslim tradition, just like other pre-modern faith traditions, usually begins, you know, religiously around puberty. You know, just like bar bat mitzvah, 13, confirmation age for many Christian denominations is, you know what, right around the same age, 8th, 9th grade. For Muslims usually consider a human being sort of becoming religiously responsible right around the age of puberty, 13-ish or so, something like that. Healthy adults, Muslims believe, are required to fast, right? But not everybody is healthy, right? So generally speaking, if a person has a condition which would harm them if they fast, then they should maybe, you know, examine their life and consider not fasting if it's a serious condition, right? You can just see here some of the exemptions that are possible. Pregnancy and nursing for women, you know, is a possible exemption from them. You know, traveling is an exemption for Muslims who are traveling long distances, or any, you know, sometimes chronic conditions. Some Muslims who have diabetes may, if they cannot manage their diabetes, for example, and fast at the same time, then they may be, you know, eligible or given an exemption or be able to take the exemption on their own initiative for that time. And again, this might be affected again too, right, by the day length. In the summer, you know, if we're fasting in the summer, that may make it harder or more challenging for some people to fast in the winter, right? If we're fasting Ramadan around Christmas time, then, you know, we might just be skipping lunch, you know, in practice at that point. So each individual Muslim is responsible to determine on their own whether they're going to fast or not based on their health status. And just as an example, I think my wife most recently missed 3 Ramadans in a row. She didn't fast. I mean, she still participated in Ramadan, but she wasn't fasting because she was either pregnant or nursing for about, you know, 3 years. So she actually took that exemption from fasting during that time for her. And as you can see here, that Quran, the quote from the Quran, and this is, if you remember back, right, those 2 verses I showed you, I think were the 182nd, 183rd verse. And right after God tells Muslims, you should fast during the month of Ramadan, right after that, Muslims believe that God tells them, God intends ease for you, not hardship. Right? So Muslims believe as a matter of faith that the month of Ramadan is something that makes our lives easier, right? God knows what we can do. God knows that we can go through this challenge and come out stronger on the other end. Like I said earlier, kind of reframing the context slightly away from the cultural idea and more towards, yeah, the month of Ramadan as spiritual practice, right? Muslims, what I would like to say is Muslims, I guess, look forward to Ramadan starting about 6 months before Ramadan actually starts. Muslims believe that the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the practice that they had when they were alive is 6 months before Ramadan, they would start praying to God saying, please let me reach another Ramadan. Let me get to the next Ramadan so that I can take advantage of the spiritual benefits and rewards. And after Ramadan ended, for the 6 months after the last Ramadan, they would pray to God saying, please God, accept my efforts and accept my sincerity and all the worship I did during the last Ramadan. So Muslims, like I said, find a great deal of spiritual strength and reward in the month of Ramadan, so much so that they literally spend the rest of the year either yearning for the next Ramadan or asking God to accept the last fast of Ramadan that they went through. It's a serious business. And then what you'll find as well is many Muslims are preparing for Ramadan physically as well as spiritually before the month starts. So we're currently, the month before Ramadan on the Islamic calendar is called Sha'ban. And many Muslims during this month are actually doing kind of a preparatory fast. So many Muslim scholars have likened the month of Ramadan to a season of reaping, right? So if you want to harvest your crops, well, hey, you got to sow your crops, you have to nurture your crops and water them and weed them and so on and so forth. So many Muslims will spend a couple months before Ramadan, doing that metaphorically, doing maybe fasting 1 or 2 days a week in the month or two before, so that when Ramadan starts, they're not doing it sort of cold turkey, right? They're ready to take maximum benefit and really reap the rewards of this beautiful month, right? What's the old saying? Like, when's the best time to plant a tree, right? Well, 20 years ago. So Muslims really try to take maximum benefit of the month by getting ready for it. The unique thing about the month of Ramadan and sort of the root, so to speak, of its significance is that Muslims believe that, over 1,400 years ago, it was during the month of Ramadan that God first revealed the sacred text of the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad, right? So it was during this month, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, one of his practices before he became a prophet, that is to say, before Muslims believe he received revelation from God, is he was deeply concerned with the injustice in his community. So he used to go and meditate and ponder and pray and wonder how can we fix this injustice? And after many, many, years and years of the Prophet Muhammad, praying and meditating, Muslims believe that during the month of Ramadan, 1,400 years ago, God spoke to him and gave him revelation. So the fact that that happened during the month of Ramadan is deeply significant for Muslims. And Muslims celebrate the month of Ramadan, as the month of fasting, but also as the month of the Quran, the month of the revelation, the beginning of the revelation of the sacred text, the Quran. So one of the practices that Muslims perform, or should, or try to perform during the month of Ramadan is really digging deep, right? Burying themselves in that sacred text, reading the Quran every day, well, religiously, right? Literally in this case, and really as much as possible engrossing themselves in that sacred text. And that's going to be reading it, listening to it, reciting it, and not just reading it sort of quietly to ourselves, but the best way to practice the Quran is to recite it out loud. The text itself, the recitation of it, Muslims believe has deep sacred value as well. So Muslims do their best to live the Quran during the month of Ramadan. Prayer is always important for Muslims, right? 5 times a day is the obligation Muslims believe. But particularly during the month of Ramadan, Muslims place arguably a heavier emphasis on congregation, communal worship. One of the things that you're going to see, I don't believe there's a mosque very close to Brainerd, to the best of my knowledge. Though the past 3 years, all kinds of things have happened the past 3 years I don't know about. But Muslims will do their best to come together to the mosque during the month of Ramadan to pray and worship together. Right? So congregational prayer is even more emphasized during the month of Ramadan than it might be at other times of the year. Charity is a key component of the month of Ramadan as well. We saw those 5 pillars a few moments ago. One of the pillars is charity. Muslims are obligated once a year to pay a portion of their wealth to the poor and needy. Right? And so many, many Muslims you'll find pay that annually, that annual charity during the month of Ramadan. And then on top of that, they're probably going to give a lot more money away as well during the month of Ramadan if they have the, if they have the means to do so. Charity is a key component. Muslims believe that all of these actions that they perform during the month of Ramadan are particularly blessed. And Muslims believe that during this month of Ramadan, God is showering us with his mercy and his forgiveness, right? Which, as believing Muslims are very conscious that they need that forgiveness and mercy from God. So it's a month of yearning, right? Seeking to please God through acts of worship and seeking God's mercy and forgiveness during this month through these actions that we've talked about. Then, of course, deeds, right? Muslims try to level up their not just their charitable giving, but also their charity in terms of physical, like deeds and the things that we do. So all of these things are considered, important all the time. But during Ramadan, like I said, Muslims try to level up all of their spiritual activities. And so usually what that looks like, a day in the life kind of thing during the month of Ramadan, Muslims oftentimes, should, and most Muslims you'll find will wake up before dawn to have breakfast, right? This is part of the prophetic model. The Prophet Muhammad himself did this and recommended that people wake up early to start the day with some breakfast, right? Some of these days get long. You should really start with some breakfast, drink some water. So you'll see Muslims all over the world, Muslims locally, you might see, lights on in the windows at 3 o'clock or 4. I think, this year, not that early, but 4 o'clock in the morning, Muslims will rise early, have some breakfast with their family. I always get up early. I always cook breakfast, get my wife out of bed if she's fasting on those days, and then have some breakfast before that dawn prayer starts. Once the dawn prayer starts, we do our morning prayers, and then guess what? We go about our lives. Ramadan is not a vacation from our responsibilities. So that means we still go to work, we go to school, we take tests, we take finals, right? All that stuff. It's just that Muslims are fasting while they're doing their normal life, right? I'm trying to think, what sports season comes up? Soccer? I can't remember. Doing all these normal activities, right? But Muslims are fasting while they're doing it, doing their prayers throughout the day. And then what you'll see, like I said, Muslims, when they break their fast, it's always better to do it with other Muslims or other people who are fasting. So Muslims, again, will place an emphasis probably on going to their local mosque because, right, where are you going to find Muslims who are breaking their fast? Well, that's all, that's our local mosque. So part of my, my habit and my family's habit is we will make, that 29 nights, we're going to spend most of those nights at our local mosque, which I have a new one close to my house, just in walking distance, thank God. So we'll walk to our mosque and break our fast with other Muslims, or just anyone who wants to join us. Many, many mosques, I don't know, maybe most mosques, I'm not sure what the percentage, but any mosque, if they have the resources to do so, they will have a breaking fast dinner every night during the month of Ramadan to celebrate Ramadan and to bring community in. Muslims perform extra prayers during the month of Ramadan, or they should. There's optional prayers that Muslims perform. So coming to the mosque at sunset, breaking fast, eating dinner with other Muslims, doing that sunset prayer, breaking fast, sunset prayer, then eat dinner, staying at the mosque a little bit later for the evening prayer, the last of the 5 prayers of the evening. During Ramadan, there are extra prayers that happen throughout the night, right? So I think, a few years ago when we were practicing, or when we were fasting Ramadan during the summer, there were nights, that evening prayer, I think was as late as maybe 10:30, if memory serves. So, you'd go to the mosque, break your fast at 9 o'clock, do your sunset prayer, stay for another hour or so, whatever that time was, do the evening prayer, and then there's more prayers. So there were times in the summertime where the dawn was like 3:30. Well, we were finishing up our prayers like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock a.m. And then you go home, you have breakfast, you take a quick nap before work starts, right? So it's a very, very busy time in terms of worship for Muslims. And this is very common, right? This is not unusual. This is very common. Mosques will be packed during the month of Ramadan with, people staying all night. Children love it too, because a lot of times this is a family event. So if you get a chance to visit a mosque during the month of Ramadan, a lot of times in the back of the prayer space, well, why are all these tents and sleeping bags in the back of the prayer space? Well, it's a family. Mom and dad are staying up late to pray, and so the kids, it's camping night for the children. So the children will camp out in the back of the mosque as mom and dad are doing those extra prayers throughout the nighttime. So it's a lot of fun, really kind of, children really love it. They get to stay up late, they eat lots of candy, no bedtime, and then they get to kind of camp at the mosque. So there's a lot of activities that keep the whole family engaged in it and make it a lot of fun for everybody. The last 10 days of Ramadan are considered the most, the most beneficial and the most sacred. I'm not sure exactly which word to use in this context, but Muslims believe there is one night of Ramadan which is more powerful and better than any other night during Ramadan or any other time. But the important thing is, Muslims, we don't know exactly which night it is. It's sometime in the last 10 nights. So during the last 10 days of Ramadan, you'll see, again, all the Muslims are at the mosque those last 10 nights doing their extra prayers, right? Staying up all night praying and that kind of thing. And one of the things that Muslims do is, Muslims will camp. I mean, adults, children, they will spend, live at the mosque for those last 10 days because it's so important to them that that they're there at the mosque on that one night, sometime during the last 10 days, that they're up and worshiping God during that, those last 10 days. So it's a really, really important occasion. I can't say enough about how meaningful it is to Muslims. I'm really lucky this year, actually. I'm teaching at a small Islamic school, in the metro area. And just because of the timing this year, we're taking our spring break is the last 10 days of Ramadan. So we're just going to take the last 10 days of Ramadan, no school, and of course there's a mosque. The school and the mosque are in the same building. So basically that's my plan this year, since I'm not working kind of a normal day job teaching at an Islamic school. I have the luxury this year of just being able to take full advantage of those last 10 days. And I'm pretty much going to be camping out at the mosque for those nights. Let me see, just for the sake of time, if anybody's curious about this kind of stuff for teachers or anyone who works with children, I'll speak a little bit about this briefly. Like I said, it's not a vacation. Muslims still go about their normal routines, but the reality is that students in particular might, not be at their best, mentally, if they've been up all night, if they're low on, if they haven't had any energy in their stomachs for many, many hours. So a lot of times for teachers, we ask one reasonable accommodation: schedule tests early if possible, or allow students the flexibility to take those tests earlier in the morning before that afternoon kind of, energy crash, which, even if you're eating, you still kind of in the afternoon, right? Post lunch, you still kind of get that little energy drain. So if possible, please, schedule tests early. If there's Phi-Ed classes, we recommend maybe some alternative activities, because especially for younger children, middle school and high school and so on, right? The mile run or these activities that they have to do, maybe can we do a walk on those days instead, something like that, some light exercise. But, fortunately it's not so hot and the days aren't so long right now. But still, it's nice to have some kind of physical accommodation. Flex time is great. Working remotely is great. I mean, I guess I don't have to say that as much these days, right? But we oftentimes ask employers, if you can offer your employees flex time in terms of when the hours that they're working, that's going to be beneficial to your employer or to your employee and also the work that they're producing for you. So if they can kind of switch their work hours a little bit when they're more alert, that's a good thing. Shift workers need a break, right? I don't think there's a lot of shift workers here at this school, but a lot of times you'll see, right, there's a lot of East Africans working at, first, second generation immigrants working at meatpacking plants across the state, right? And they're working shifts. And one thing I know, I think it's Jenny O'Turkey. This is an old memory, so my apologies. But they're actually, those lines, they don't like to stop those lines for anything. But at many plants, these plants where they've got a lot of Muslim workers, they'll actually shut down the production line for about 20, 30 minutes because they have so many Muslim employees, so they can stop, take a break, break their fast, eat some dinner, pray, and then get back to work. Because otherwise, right, it would be they'd be postponing that and going hungry all night, which wouldn't be good for anybody. So little accommodations like this can be very, very beneficial for Muslim students or employees. And again, I'll welcome questions in just a few moments. Just a couple things to wrap up here. So one of my favorite things during Ramadan, aside from the sacred aspect of the month, are taking heart dinners. And this is, I love this. This is one of my favorite photographs as well. Taking heart dinners, it's something that the Minnesota Council of Churches helped create, I think, a number of years ago. I can't remember exactly the date now, but They help mosques across the state of Minnesota host special open houses during the month of Ramadan. And I think, the list isn't out yet for this year, but I think like usually about 25 or 30 mosques across the state have these special open houses. It's called a Taking Heart Dinner. And like I said, pretty much any mosque is going to have, breaking fast or iftar dinners every evening during Ramadan. But many mosques set aside a special night as kind of an open house iftar dinner, right? Breaking fast dinner. So basically the idea is they have extra food on hand, they have, extra volunteers, just to kind of show everybody around, to welcome people and make sure you're comfortable visiting maybe for the first time, a mosque, a Muslim house of worship. So you can find more about that at the Minnesota Council of Churches, mnchurches.org website. I hope that goes up soon. I used to actually help organize this. I'm not doing that this year, so I'm kind of in the dark on this as well. But please, if you have the chance to go to visit a mosque during Ramadan, please do so. I guarantee, at the very least, you're going to have one of the best meals that you've had in a long time. Because most Muslim communities in the state of Minnesota, right, are centered around first generation, second generation immigrant communities. So you're going to get some great Somali food, some East African food. You're going to get some great, Desi, like Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Indian food. We've got a Bosnian mosque, I think maybe 2 Bosnian mosques, I think, in Minneapolis. You go there, you're going to get some, I haven't been to that one myself, right? So you can if you want to visit 2 or 3 Taking Heart dinners, you can do like a world tour in cuisine and get some great food from place to place. A friend of mine, the fellow convert, she likes to joke that she converted for the chicken, which I know it's a joke, but there's some times where I think that's, I wonder if she's serious some of the times. Like I said, the food's a lot of fun. So please check into this. Like I said, they haven't published the list yet, so I don't have that to share with you now. Probably St. Cloud would be the closest. Is that right? I don't know up here. But there are many of the mosques in greater Minnesota do this as well. And then Eid Mubarak comes up. So this is the greeting that Muslims use. So the day, right, the last day of fasting, I believe predicted is April 20th, which is a Thursday. So the day after the last day of fasting, so this is the beginning of the next month on the Islamic calendar, is Eid. So Eid means holiday in Arabic. But in American English, we just say Eid to refer to the Muslim holidays. There's 2 main holidays. The first of the 2 holidays, and the second most important, is the Eid right after Ramadan finishes. So we say the greeting that we use is Eid Mubarak. Eid Mubarak just means blessed Ramadan. So you can either say blessed Ramadan, or if you want to, blessed Eid, or if you want to level up, you can say Eid Mubarak, right, which means the same thing in Arabic. That's a Friday this year, which is good. That's a particularly nice time. So usually Muslims take 3 days at least off. It's traditionally a 3-day holiday, which is good. Like I said, it's happening on a Friday this year, so we don't have to take as many vacation days for Muslims who are working. But a lot of Muslims will take longer. So it depends. Again, cultural practice might be different. Some Muslims here will take like 1 or 2 days off. Some Muslim families might take like the whole week off, right? So if you have Muslim students, it's a good idea to ask in advance, like, hey, are you going to miss some time? Or, well, hopefully this is a college. It's their responsibility to check in with you. But just to be aware, some Muslims may take more or less time for this holiday. So it's a lot of fun. The holiday itself the Eid is typically celebrated outdoors when possible, because our mosques are simply not big enough, right? There's so many people coming together celebrating Eid that we almost always do it outdoors at some pavilion or something like that. Although this year, right, we're getting into, as we're getting closer to winter, hopefully we'll be celebrating outdoors in beautiful warm weather on April 21st in Minnesota, or it could be snowing about 50-50 on April 21st, right? It's a great deal of fun. This is me with my wife and my youngest daughter, my youngest child. I think this was last year. So it's just a wonderful time. Like I said, children love it. It's candy. There's gifts. It's like a carnival a lot of times, right? A lot of times we'll invite in, we'll rent a big space. Like food vendors will come in, and it's just, we'll have, I think this one we had like one of those kind of magician-y kind of balloon, children's entertainers come in. It's a great time for everybody, and it's a lot of fun. And usually, right, just as we've been fasting for 29 days or so, right? It's great to have my cup of coffee at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we're all kind of a little bit tired, But now it's like things get really exciting, because I think on this day we went to like 3 or 4 different Ramadan parties, or celebrations. And even, like I said, for the next several days, it's visit after visiting all of our friends, going to these celebrations. So like I said, right when we need a break, maybe take a nap or something, it's like, ooh, now we're celebrating. It's a lot of fun. But again, the point I want to make, and I touched on earlier, is it really is kind of bittersweet. Like I said, it's great to have my cup of coffee at 9 o'clock or my tea or whatever. But on the other hand, the month is so special to Muslims that there is kind of a, it's bittersweet. There's a little bit of mourning that happens at the same time, right? And thinking, what could we have done better, right? And even, like I said, anticipating the next year. It's just so much fun. I can't say enough about. This is the first time I've spoken about Ramadan where I don't need tissues in some time too. So it's a lot of fun. So yeah, children love it. And then that's it. I kind of rushed a little bit at the end there. So I wanted to leave time for questions. I know some students might have to get back to class, or maybe professors as well. Jason's back there with the microphone if anyone wants to ask any questions.
Well, first of all, please join me in thanking John for that excellent presentation. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing, John. Yes, who has questions? We have a relatively small group today, so we have an opportunity to have some good exchanges. Tracy.
Yeah, I left a few things out because I know that people have questions about, so I hope you ask those things too.
So you actually answered 3 out of my 4 questions as you were presenting, so thank you very much. But one of the questions I had was about language, and you had mentioned the breakfast in the evening was iftar.
Yes.
Is that the word for breakfast in the morning as well? Or is just the evening breakfast? I'm sorry, I'm a linguist, so I like
I don't know, actually. That's a good. I haven't actually thought about that too much. No, the way, at least the way it's used colloquially today in the United States, iftar refers specifically to a breaking fast dinner during the month of Ramadan, right? But not all of us are native speakers of Arabic, right? Iftar is an Arabic word, so I don't know if in normal Arabic that would be used for breakfast or not. So my apologies, I don't know. But when we say iftar, usually we're talking about Ramadan.
I do know the word.
Oh.
For the breakfast in the morning is
Oh yeah, that one. Yeah, that early morning breakfast that we talked about before dawn is suhoor for Muslims. Yeah.
Well, as I'm waiting for additional questions, I have a question myself. I'm curious about how practicing Muslims in Nordic countries grapple with the incredibly long days. If you're north of the Arctic Circle, of course, there is no sunset.
Thank you. Yeah, I left that one.
Accommodations made for northerly practicing Muslims.
Yeah, I left that one out there for you guys. That's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of Muslims in Northern Europe, right? We know this, like Finland and stuff, and yeah, literally above the Arctic Circle. So a few years ago, remember when we were fasting on the summer solstice, I saw some, I don't know, did we have TikTok back? Anyway, whatever the social media was back in those days. I was watching a video, there's some imam, like, I don't know where he was, but he was above the Arctic Circle. And he's like, yeah, we just, he's talking about breaking their fast and this stuff. And he's taking a video, and behind him, the sun's like, up here above the horizon. And I mean, the sun, it never sets. And if you strictly followed the rules, technically, you'd starve, right? So a lot of times what communities above the Arctic Circle, what they might do is pick a city further south and fast according to those times, right? And I don't know the particulars, each community would make that decision independently on their own, right? Because there's no, there's no Muslim pope, so each mosque community makes their own decisions about how they practice and how they worship, and not how they worship, how they implement these practices. So what they decided to do is fast according to a city that was a little bit further south, and that gave them a few hours. Even though the sun was technically still up, they had a few hours to break fast and eat and drink before starting the fast again. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I suppose vice versa too. I suppose, if in the winter, right, if Ramadan's in the winter, I suppose they would maybe switch it up so that they would actually fast, right? So if the sun never rises, what do you do? So I guess we'll figure that one out in a few years. But yeah, so they would make some accommodation to give themselves a few hours to eat and drink. Yes?
Hi. I'm just curious, in those last 10 days, you said there's something that happens on one of the nights.
Yes.
What is it, and how do you know that it's happening?
So like I said, right, Muslims believe that during the month of Ramadan is when the Quran was first revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, right? And specifically, it was somewhere within those last 10 nights. So somewhere within the last 10 nights of Ramadan is the exact day or date when the God first revealed the text of the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad. But we don't know which of those 10 nights it was, right? So Muslims will search for it, right? And when we mean, we'll look for that, we'll search for that night. And what we mean by that is we're just, each one of those 10 nights, Muslims will just do their best because that night is so important, so powerful, and that connection with the sacred and the divine is so close to us that we want to find it. So the only way of knowing for sure that you're praying on that night is to make sure you pray each of those 10 nights. So Muslims, like I said, during the last 10 nights of Ramadan, they're just going to go for each one of those nights at the mosque, spend all night on their feet praying, worshiping God, and hoping and believing that one of those nights is that particular night when God first revealed the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad. Does that make sense?
In my prayer and fasting tradition, repentance is an important component. Is it in your faith also?
Oh my goodness. Ramadan is also the month of forgiveness, right? So, God is infinitely merciful in the Muslim tradition, right? Which I hope sounds familiar to people from other traditions as well, right? God is merciful and loving to us. So, yes, Muslims are seeking God's forgiveness through accent and worship and repentance during the month of Ramadan, especially during, this month of Ramadan. We can do this anytime, right? But especially during the month of Ramadan, because that connection with the divine is so close to us, Muslims will double down on their devotions and seeking repentance. Yes, absolutely. This is a very important aspect of it. Because like I said, we need, as Muslims, we believe we need it. We can't do this on our own. We need God's mercy in our lives. And when's the best time? Well, always is the best time to do that, but especially during Ramadan. And that's why Muslims are so worshipful, especially during Ramadan. Yes, yeah, forgiveness. We can't say enough about repentance and forgiveness, but yeah, if I go too much about that, like I said, I'll get a little emotional.
Is a pilgrimage always to Mecca? And what is the importance of going to Mecca?
The pilgrimage. I wish I had some different slides to show you. The pilgrimage is the fifth of those pillars of Islam. Every Muslim should do it at least once in their life if they have the means to do so. Right? It's an expensive and arduous journey, even in the modern era. Mecca, yes, it has to be to Mecca. Right? That pillar of Islam is the pilgrimage to the city of Mecca, which is modern-day Saudi Arabia, in the Arabian Peninsula. So yes, and there's a lot of significance to this, right? Actually, maybe it's probably going to be really hard to see, but I'm going to show you the picture anyway. You might have to get out your binoculars. So you can kind of see, that's the Kaaba. That black cubical structure in the center of Mecca is called the Kaaba in Arabic. Muslims believe this was built by the prophet Abraham, right? So he built this thousands of years ago as a house of worship to God, because we know, right? Abraham was a monotheist, right? That he is the individual who connects us, the Abrahamic faiths, right? Jews, Christians, Muslims, and Muslims believe the prophet Abraham built that structure in the city of Mecca thousands of years ago as a house of worship to God. Fast forward a little bit, Muslims believe that the city of Mecca is where the Prophet Muhammad was born and where he lived most of his life. So it's also significant because that's where the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he walked the earth, right? So Muslims going back on pilgrimage are, walking in his footsteps, right? Getting as close as we can to him. There's a lot of ceremonies and rites that are associated with the pilgrimage, but fundamentally it all centers back to that concept of monotheism, right? Muslims oftentimes, this is an optional trip. Muslims have to go to Mecca, but while you're there, right, while Muslims are there, they'll often take a side trip to the city of Medina. The Prophet Muhammad lived the last few years of his life in the city of Medina, and he's actually buried in the city of Medina. So many Muslims, any Muslim who can, when they go to Mecca, they will also make a side trip to Medina. And, it's beautiful in its own right, but Muslims will visit the gravesite of the Prophet Muhammad and pray, and give him, pray for him and send, say salam alaikum, send him peace and blessings while they're there. It's a very emotional experience. You can actually see it's protected, of course, nowadays, but you can actually approach and see his gravesite, right? And it's a very emotional experience for Muslims. The pilgrimage, I haven't done mine yet, by the way, but I hope next year I hope to do it, or at least I hope to visit Mecca next year, God willing. But it's, as many of you know, pilgrimage is a powerfully transformative experience, right? And so I always tell people, if you haven't read Malcolm X, if you're curious about pilgrimage, and especially this pilgrimage, please read Malcolm X. The autobiography of Malcolm X, remember, Malcolm X's journey was a journey of transformation, right? Just like we're all looking for. And he was a member of the Nation of Islam, had some ideas which were not consistent with mainstream Islam, particularly his ideas about race. You know, and eventually when he made his pilgrimage to the city of Mecca, that's when he was, I mean, he came back. If you ever go on YouTube, watch a video of him before his pilgrimage and watch a video of him after his pilgrimage. He came back a changed man, very different, right? He was promoting reconciliation between races. He was a segregationist before. Nation of Islam thought black people should have their own state, basically. He came back saying, no, peace is possible. Because he was at Mecca, praying with the darkest skinned African on one side of him, and the other side praying with him was the bluest-eyed, blondest Northern European man he'd ever seen in his life. But all coming together and, joined with this common vision of peace and worshiping God, right? And so it tends to be a very transformative experience. And please read Malcolm. I think it's just one chapter in Malcolm X. It's a beautiful chapter. It's moving. I think it's inspirational for all of us, Muslim or not. But if you're curious about that, please read his account of his pilgrimage. And you can tell, like I said, I haven't done mine yet, but I really want to. I get really excited about this. Because I've met many people in my life who come back from pilgrimage, changed people.
Other questions? Okay.
I was going to say isn't there a link between Islam and, sorry. Isn't there a link between Islam and Christianity and Jewish, especially Jewish and Islam?
Yes, yeah, explicitly so, yes. There is a link from the Muslim perspective, to be clear. There is a connection between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Muslims believe, I guess I'll do this the roundabout way. So Muslims believe that the God that they are worshiping is the same God that Abraham worshipped. Muslims believe the God that they are worshiping is the same God that created Adam and Eve, right? So it's kind of a roundabout way of saying it. As monotheists, Muslims believe we're all worshiping the same God, right? And Muslims believe that Abraham, for example, was a prophet, right? And I mean, obviously a very important one. And Abraham, that's why we often refer to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as the Abrahamic faiths. Because each of us, we all look to the prophet Abraham as, well, I mean, I guess our spiritual forefather, right? And he's the glue which kind of connects us. And when Muslims believe that Abraham came to build the Kaaba in the city of Mecca, he did that with his son Ishmael, right? So Ishmael and Abraham built that house of worship to God together, right? And Ishmael, as many people may know, is considered kind of eventually his descendants became, Muslims. One of his descendants was the Prophet Muhammad. So yeah, we are connected at least through the Prophet Abraham, but even through that aspect of monotheism, we are deeply connected. Muslims believe Jesus was a prophet. Muslims love and respect and listen to the teachings of Jesus as well, right? With some slight differences, of course, or not so minor, but yeah, we are connected through these stories.
Probably have time for about 2 more questions. What do we got? Are there any hands raised? Gary. Yes, sir. Get my steps in today.
Well, thanks for coming. You just answered one question I had about whether or not they just, Muslims tend to see Jesus as a prophet. Another question I have, do you find that Muslims, Islamic folks, are going to Jerusalem on pilgrimages in a sense as they do to Mecca? Or is it just Mecca and Medina or, know?
So for Muslims, do they also visit, right, other sacred sites, particularly Jerusalem, right? The Holy Lands, I guess we call them, right? The short answer is yes. But Muslims obviously would prioritize the pilgrimage to Mecca first and foremost as an act of worship, as an obligation of the Islamic faith. But yeah, many Muslims will visit, Jerusalem and sacred sites there to visit too as well, right? Because, I mean, again, Jesus, Muslims consider to be a prophet, and there are many other prophets who lived in that region, in prior times. So Muslims will visit those sacred sites as well. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, the short answer is yes. There's much more that can be said, but I'll just leave it at that.
What do you have in your hand?
These are, oh yeah, I should raise them up. These are prayer beads. And I call them prayer beads because I've heard, like, depending on where people are from, I've heard like 6 different names for what people call these. But prayer beads, it's a meditation aid and a prayer aid, right? So, right, one of the goals for Muslims, right, is to live a life of worship. Recognizing God's presence in our lives, not just when we're praying, right? Not just 5 times a day or maybe on Fridays or during Ramadan, but like our whole lives. So there are certain prayers that Muslims will perform just throughout the day, constantly. This is not a requirement. This is kind of an extra thing that some Muslims will use. But this has 99 beads. So Muslims believe that God has 99 beautiful names or attributes. Mercy, the merciful, the compassionate, the loving, the forgiving, all of these beautiful things. So many Muslims will actually memorize the 99 names in Arabic and just count them over and over. Or maybe this one has 99, plus it's got side beads too, kind of like an abacus, right? So some Muslims will wake up and say, I'm going to say this prayer 1,000 times today. And so they'll say, and then, you do 99, and okay, that's 1 set, and that's 2 sets. So Muslims will try to build that worship and that recognition of God's love and mercy in our lives, throughout their daily lives. So this is just kind of a helpful reminder. It's also something to, keeps my fingers busy. So when I'm feeling fidgety, I may as well put that fidgety, that nervousness to work, right? And, thinking and remembering and reflecting on God and worshiping God, right? So yeah, just like other faith traditions have prayer beads to help them pray, this is kind of an extra sort of thing that some Muslims use. This came from Medina. I've never been to Mecca or Medina, as I mentioned. A friend of mine went a few years ago, and he brought this back with him as a gift to me from the city of Medina. So this is the closest I've been. So I kind of cherish these, and this is my intention to go myself to visit someday. So yeah, just something I use to help me kind of, keep me busy. I mean, I could listen to a podcast when I'm driving, or I could do other things, or I could just kind of, again, worship a little bit in those little moments that we have, right? Moment here, moment there, right? That stuff adds up, to a life of worship, I hope. So yeah, just a little helper.
John, I'd like to take the liberty to ask the last question, although I suspect some of our guests will have additional questions for you after the fact. But
well, you can always hit us up if you have any questions, please. This is what we love to do. There's many of us who volunteer with this organization. So if you have any further questions or want me or want another person to come up and talk to you, we'd love to. So yeah.
I was wondering if you would be comfortable sharing a little bit about your conversion experience. It's my understanding that you served abroad, and I was wondering how you converted to Islam, excuse me.
Do we have a hard limit on this? End time?
Maybe the abridged version.
Yeah, the abridged version. I grew up in a family of faith practice in a Christian tradition. So I always grew up with this idea, and I always felt in my heart, right, this sense of something bigger than us, right? Even in this country today, right, with rise, people less and less associating with a religious tradition. Most people still, even if they're not associated with a religious tradition, still believe in a higher power, right? And that's kind of how I was for many years. My tradition didn't exactly mesh up with what was in my heart, but I still felt that yearning for something bigger, something, God, I guess, So when I grew up, when I joined the Army, I learned Arabic. Right? The Army taught me Arabic. I spent 2 years in language school. So I met Muslims for the first time, and eventually I traveled. I can read the Quran in Arabic, right? And I started reading the Quran in Arabic. I read about Islam through primary sources for the first time in my life. So I read in Arabic the words of the Prophet Muhammad as well as the Quran, peace be upon him. And so what I found was something so very different from what I had been raised to believe about Islam and about Muslims, right? When I was growing up in the 1980s, everything I knew about Muslims came from Chuck Norris movies, Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, right? Remember who was the bad guy in those movies? Well, right? There's always some, brown guy from the Middle East blowing up bombs. So that's what I knew about Muslims, even though I didn't know it. So when I met Muslims for the first time, when I learned about the faith of Islam directly, not through mass media, right? I was just blown away by how different it was, right, from my expectations or what I had been taught. And so I just kept digging and digging and learning, and over time, I just really fell in love with the tradition, right? I found something so remarkable. And even for me, that process of connecting directly with God's word, right? Again, Muslims believe that the Quran is literally God speaking to humanity in the Arabic language. So that connection was something I found very inspiring, you know, and I love that, and I still love that today. The example of Prophet Muhammad, his life, the way he lived his life is to say the least, remarkable. Who he was at that time in history, there was no other person in the world like him. He was so remarkable, committed to justice, women's rights, you know, all of these things that we take for granted today. He was saying these things 1,400 years ago. Not only saying it, but living up to it and implementing rights for people and justice and so on and so forth. So I found that powerfully inspiring in my life. When I converted, one day I woke up and I said, well, I believe all this stuff anyway, right? And so I said, I'm going to take that next step and commit my life to this. So I was at the University of Minnesota studying there. And I went to the community center on campus. You know, they've got the community center with all the different organizations. So I went in there. There were two Muslim guys just hanging out, you know, as college students. I said, hey, I want to convert to Islam. And they're like, oh, great, they wanted to teach me about Islam. And I'm, no. So I said, you know, I converted with them. They witnessed my conversion, and that was it. And that was the beginning of, right, a whole new journey for me of learning and practice and God willing transformation. Right? So that's very small nutshell. That's why I did it, and you know, which I'm grateful for because now I get to meet you all.
Thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us, John. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.